In a faraway galaxy, there was an empire known for its strength, its powerful leaders, and the rare, mysterious creatures that lived within its borders. The empire was ancient, full of secrets, and ruled by a fierce empress. Her name was Empress Solara, and she was known across the stars as a leader who was unshakable, fearless, and wise. The people of the empire respected her, and the creatures she ruled were legendary. Among these creatures were the Albino Hatchlings, rare beings that were as white as snow with glowing eyes. These hatchlings were known to have great powers that only the Empress could truly understand. But one day, everything changed. It began with a strange, unexplained event. A small, fragile spacecraft entered the Empire's space, but it was unlike any ship the Empire had seen before. It was small, almost too small for any form of life to be inside, and it appeared to be damaged. The ship drifted through space, slowly tumbling out of control, as if it were abandoned. The Empire's advanced sensors detected the ship, and its strange signals caught the attention of the Empress's council. A group of soldiers was sent to investigate, their mission to bring back whatever or whoever was aboard the mysterious craft. As they approached the ship, they noticed something odd. The ship was old and battered, but there was something inside. The soldiers carefully boarded the ship, their weapons drawn, their minds on alert. They moved cautiously through the dark interior, their footsteps echoing in the quiet space. Then, in the small, cramped cabin of the ship, they found a human child. The child was lying in a small compartment, wrapped in what appeared to be tattered clothing. He looked no older than 5 or 6 years old, his small, fragile body curled up in a ball. His skin was pale, almost as white as the albino hatchlings the Empress ruled over, and his hair, though messy, was a striking shade of silver. His small chest rose and fell with each shallow breath, and he appeared to be unconscious. The soldiers were shocked. A human, in the heart of the alien empire? This was unheard of. Humans had never been seen in this part of the galaxy. They were a distant race, living on far-off planets, far beyond the Empire's reach. And yet, here was one, abandoned in a broken spacecraft, drifting into the Empire's space. The soldiers did not know what to do. They had never encountered a human before, and they were unsure of how to handle the situation. They decided to take the child back to the capital, to the palace, where the Empress could decide what to do with him. As the soldiers carried the child through the grand halls of the palace, word spread quickly. The Empress, known for her cold and calculated decision-making, was informed immediately. She ordered that the child be brought to her throne room as soon as possible. She had to know what was going on, and why this strange child had appeared in her empire. When the child was brought before her, the Empress studied him closely. She was a tall, imposing figure, her silver armor gleaming in the light of the room. Her long dark hair flowed behind her, and her piercing green eyes never left the child's face. She had seen many strange things in her time as Empress, but this was something new. The child, though unconscious, seemed oddly calm. His small hands were curled into fists, his body still, yet there was something about him that made the Empress uneasy. She had never seen a human before, but something in her gut told her this child was no ordinary being. His presence felt powerful, almost as if he was meant to be there, though she couldn't explain why. "Who is this?" the Empress asked, her voice echoing through the hall. One of her advisors, an older and wiser figure, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we believe he is human. We do not know how he came to be here, but his spacecraft was drifting through space, abandoned and damaged. It seems he was the only one aboard." The Empress narrowed her eyes. A human child in her empire with no explanation? It was a mystery that needed to be solved. But there was something more, something strange in the air that she couldn't quite place. As the Empress stood there, deep in thought, the palace doors suddenly burst open. A group of royal guards entered, and in their midst were her most prized creatures, the Albino Hatchlings. These hatchlings were not ordinary creatures. They were magnificent, with scales that shone like white marble and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. They were intelligent, fiercely protective, and rare beyond measure. The Empress had raised them since they were born, and they had always been loyal to her, never straying far from her side. But today was different. As the hatchlings entered the room, they immediately stopped in their tracks. They turned their heads toward the human child, their glowing eyes locking onto his. The soldiers and advisors who stood nearby felt an unsettling chill fill the air. The hatchlings, usually so calm and distant, began to make a soft, high-pitched sound, almost like a hum. It was as if they were calling to the child. The Empress's eyes widened in disbelief. The hatchlings had never shown such interest in anyone or anything other than her. They were wild, untamable, and powerful. But now they were acting as though they knew the child, as if they had been waiting for him. Without warning, the hatchlings moved forward. They carefully circled the child, their long, delicate bodies moving with grace. They nudged him gently with their snouts, as if trying to wake him. The child, still unconscious, did not stir, but the hatchlings did not give up. They stayed close, surrounding him, their soft sounds growing louder, their eyes glowing more intensely. The Empress stood frozen, a mix of confusion and fear settling over her. What was going on? Why were her hatchlings so drawn to this human child? And why did it feel as if the fate of her empire was somehow tied to him? She knew one thing for certain. This child, this human, was not just an ordinary visitor. There was something more, something ancient and powerful, and she had to find out what it was before it was too late. As the hatchlings continued to hover around the child, the Empress's heart raced. This was just the beginning of a mystery that would change everything. The story had only just begun. Empress Solara stood at the center of her grand throne room. Her piercing green eyes locked onto the scene before her. Her albino hatchlings, usually distant and aloof, had surrounded the human child in an almost protective manner. They circled him slowly, their scales gleaming like polished ivory in the light of the grand hall. But there was something strange about the way they moved. The hatchlings, who had never shown such behavior before, were now acting as if they were familiar with the child. The Empress frowned, a tight knot forming in her chest. She had raised these hatchlings from birth. She knew their every movement, their every sound. They were wild creatures, yes, but they had always been loyal to her alone. Never had they behaved this way toward anyone or anything, not even towards other members of her court. And yet, here they were, surrounding a human child, as if they were drawn to him by some invisible force. The child lay motionless on the cold stone floor, his small, fragile body barely moving. His silver hair tangled around his face, and his skin, as pale as the hatchling's scales, looked almost too delicate to touch. The soldiers and royal guards watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. The Empress's advisors stood at the back, whispering among themselves, but none of them dared to speak too loudly. This was beyond any understanding they had of the creatures or the world they lived in. One of the hatchlings, larger and more commanding than the others, extended its long neck and gently nuzzled the child's face. A soft hum escaped its throat, a sound unlike anything the Empress had ever heard before. It wasn't the usual hiss or growl that the hatchlings used to communicate. No, this was a sound filled with warmth, almost affection. The child's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, everything in the room went completely still. His wide, silver eyes locked onto the hatchling in front of him. The hatchling, sensing the child's awakening, leaned even closer, its soft, glowing eyes never leaving his. Slowly, almost as if he had done this 100 times before, the child reached out his hand toward the creature. His fingers brushed against the hatchling's smooth, cool scales, and for a moment, it seemed as if the whole room held its breath. The Empress couldn't believe what she was seeing. The hatchlings, who were known for their wild, unpredictable behavior, were not only allowing the child to touch them, they were inviting it. This had never happened before. No one, not even her most trusted advisors, had ever seen the hatchlings show this kind of reaction to a being outside of their own kind. "What is happening?" whispered one of the advisors, his voice trembling with unease. The Empress didn't answer. She was too stunned, too focused on the scene before her. She had no explanation for what she was witnessing, but one thing was certain: the child was no ordinary human. There was something about him, something that had triggered an incredible reaction in her creatures. The bond between them seemed to run deeper than just instinct or curiosity. As the minutes passed, the other hatchlings began to mimic the behavior of the first. They too nudged the child, their soft, powerful bodies moving with grace as they circled around him. One of the hatchlings, smaller than the others, gingerly lay down beside the child, its long tail curling protectively around his form. The child, still half asleep, didn't seem to mind at all. In fact, he looked strangely comfortable, as if he had been here before. Among these creatures, in another life, the Empress felt a chill run down her spine. The hatchlings, each more intelligent and powerful than any creature she had ever encountered, had never shown such behavior. And now they were showing it to a mere human child. She had to know more. Without a word, she motioned for the guards to step back, giving the hatchlings and the child more space. She watched as the hatchlings continued to watch over him, their glowing eyes never wavering. They were silent, but their presence was overwhelming, as though they were trying to protect the child from something or someone. The Empress walked closer, her boots clicking softly on the stone floor. She knelt beside the child, her gaze softening as she examined him. There was something almost ancient about him, something she couldn't place. But it wasn't just the child himself that bothered her. It was the hatchlings. They had never reacted to anyone like this, never responded so strongly to a foreign presence. "Who are you?" she whispered to herself, the question hanging in the air, unanswered. Just as she was about to reach out and touch the child, something unexpected happened. The largest hatchling, the one that had nuzzled him first, turned its head toward her. The Empress froze. The creature's eyes, glowing with an ethereal light, were fixed on her with an intensity she had never seen before. It was as if it was warning her. Its eyes seemed to say, "Do not interfere." The Empress paused, a surge of uncertainty flooding through her. She had spent her entire life commanding respect from her empire, from its creatures, from everyone who lived under her rule. But here, before her, she felt something she had not felt in years: fear. The hatchlings, in their strange protective state, were not under her control. They were not answering to her commands, as they always had. No, they were answering to the child. For the first time in her life, the Empress was unsure of herself. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The hatchlings remained still, watching her, as if waiting for something. Waiting for her to make a decision. Suddenly, the child stirred once again. This time, his eyes were fully open, and he looked directly at the Empress. His silver gaze met hers, and in that brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. The Empress felt a strange pull, a connection, as if this child held the key to something greater than herself. It was a connection that ran deeper than anything she had ever felt before, and yet, it left her more uncertain than ever. The room seemed to close in around her as she stood, staring down at the child. The hatchlings continued to hum softly, their eyes locked on her, waiting. What had she just found? And why did it feel as though the fate of her entire empire rested on this small, unassuming human child? The answers were just beyond her reach. But she knew one thing: this child was no ordinary visitor. And whatever had brought him here, whatever bond he shared with her hatchlings, was something that could change everything. The Empress Solara sat alone in her private chamber, her fingers lightly tapping on the cold, marble surface of her desk. The day's events had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. This human child, was a puzzle, one that seemed impossible to solve. Her hatchlings, her most trusted creatures, had shown an unexpected attachment to him, and she could not understand why. Nothing in her long years of ruling had prepared her for something like this. The child, still under close observation by her royal guards, had refused to leave the side of the hatchlings. Every time he stirred from his slumber, the albino creatures would surround him, gently nuzzling him with their cool, smooth heads. It was a strange sight, one that did not fit within the rules of nature that the Empress had always believed in. The hatchlings, who were known for their isolation, their power, and their mysterious, almost ancient origins, were acting as if they were bound to him in a way that went beyond instinct. Solara had spent years studying her hatchlings, learning their habits, understanding their behaviors, but this was beyond comprehension. Nothing in the records of her ancestors mentioned anything about a human being able to bond with her creatures in such a way. Nothing in her empire's history spoke of a child capable of commanding such devotion from beings that had never shown affection for anything but their own kind. As the weight of her thoughts pressed down on her, the Empress was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Without waiting for permission, one of her trusted advisors, a scholar named Darian, entered. His robes were long and black, and his expression was one of concern. He had been with the Empress for many years, and his wisdom was often sought in moments of crisis. "Your Majesty," Darian began, bowing deeply, "there is something you must see. We've found more information about the child." The Empress didn't respond immediately. Instead, she motioned for him to continue as she steeled herself for whatever news he would bring. The last few days had been filled with uncertainty, and she had a sinking feeling that there was more to this mystery than anyone could fathom. "What have you learned?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp. Darian's eyes darted briefly to the side, as if weighing how best to present the information. "It seems the child was not just abandoned in your empire by accident," he said. "We found ancient records, that suggest the human race has had contact with the hatchlings long before the founding of your empire." The Empress raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. "Contact? That's impossible. The humans have never been in our territory. Our records do not show any such thing." "I know, Your Majesty," Darian responded, "but these records are different. They speak of an ancient prophecy, one that foretold the arrival of a human who would come to bond with the hatchlings in a way no one had ever imagined. It was said that this human would bring a new era to the galaxy, one that would either unite or destroy all." A shiver ran down the Empress' spine. "A prophecy?" she repeated, her voice filled with disbelief. "This is preposterous. Why would the hatchlings, our most precious creatures, have such a bond with a human? They have always been kept far from any other species." Darian nodded, understanding her skepticism. "The prophecy speaks of a child, a human child, who would be linked to the hatchlings by blood. Not by force, not by training, but by a deeper connection, one that transcends what we know of the world. The records say that this child would be the key to unlocking the full potential of the hatchlings, and that their bond with him would change the course of history." The Empress stood up, her mind racing. "But how? Why now? Why would such a prophecy resurface after so long? And what is the meaning of this bond? Could it be?" She trailed off, her thoughts spinning in a whirlwind of confusion. Darian stepped forward, his expression grave. "There is more, Your Majesty. The prophecy also warns of the dangers this child could bring. While his bond with the hatchlings could be the salvation of the galaxy, it could just as easily bring destruction. The hatchlings are powerful, yes, but they are also unpredictable. What if they are not in control of their actions? What if this child has the ability to command them in ways we cannot anticipate?" The Empress took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the decision that lay before her was almost unbearable. If the prophecy was true, the child could either be the savior of her empire or its downfall. She had no choice but to find out. The next few days were filled with intense study and observation. The Empress ordered her scientists to analyze the child's every move. They ran tests, examined his DNA, and searched for any signs of unusual abilities. But the results were baffling. The child's biology was entirely human, with no trace of any known alien species. And yet, the bond between him and the hatchlings was undeniable. The Empress grew more desperate as she tried to understand the true nature of the connection. She consulted ancient scrolls, speaking with the oldest and wisest beings in her empire, hoping to find some clue, some hint that would explain everything. But nothing seemed to help. The child remained an enigma, and the hatchlings were as tightly bound to him as ever. One evening, after yet another long day of research, the Empress stood by her balcony, gazing out over her empire. The city sprawled beneath her, a shining sea of lights and towering structures. But despite the beauty and the power that surrounded her, she felt an emptiness, a sense of dread creeping over her. What if the prophecy was right? What if this child truly was the key to a new era, one that could either save or destroy everything she had built? And yet, despite the fear that gripped her heart, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more at play here. The hatchlings had chosen him, and in a strange way, that gave her a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this child, this mysterious human, was not the threat she feared, but rather the answer she had been seeking all along. As she stared out at the vast expanse of her empire, the Empress made a silent vow. She would protect the child at any cost. She would uncover the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. The fate of her empire, and perhaps the entire galaxy, depended on it. The tension in the Empress's palace was thick, like the calm before a storm. For the past few days, Solara had ordered all eyes to be on the human child. She had to understand what was happening, to unravel the mystery that seemed to unfold around him like an ancient riddle, one that even the most learned minds in her empire could not solve. The child, though still barely a whisper of a presence, was more than he appeared. She could feel it, even if she didn't yet understand why. Her hatchlings, always so proud and fierce, had become his silent guardians. Each day, the Empress would come to see him, standing silently by his side as the albino creatures nestled close to him, their glowing eyes fixed on her. The child would stir at their gentle touch, his silver hair shimmering under the soft light of the palace chambers, but never once did he speak. He wasn't crying, or even trying to escape the creatures. He simply lay there, calm and silent. But something about the way his hands reached out toward the hatchlings, as though he knew exactly where to touch them, made Solara uneasy. The Empress stood over the child now, studying him as if he were a relic from a forgotten time. The palace was quiet, too quiet, but she had grown used to the silence in the wake of the uncertainty. She could feel the eyes of her advisors on her, the unease in the room palpable. Even Darian, her most trusted scholar, stood off to the side, his brow furrowed in thought. "What do you see, Darian?" Solara's voice was sharp, though tired, as she turned to her advisor. "What are we missing?" "The hatchlings are not just affectionate, they are protective. They cling to him as though he holds something they need. And yet we know nothing about this child." Darian stepped forward, his expression serious. He was not easily shaken, but the sight of the hatchlings in this strange state of attachment to the child had caused a noticeable unease in him as well. "I believe the answer is in the connection between them," Darian said quietly. "The hatchlings are drawn to something in him, something they understand, something familiar. But it's not just their instinct. They seem to recognize something about him that even we do not." The Empress looked down at the child, her gaze narrowing. He was so still, so serene. His small hands, now open and relaxed, seemed to almost glow with a strange energy when touched by the hatchlings. She had seen nothing like it in all her years of ruling. But the energy that pulsed through the room when the child was near them was undeniable. It felt ancient, something beyond the known laws of nature. As if on cue, the largest hatchling, the one that had first nudged the child awake, slowly moved closer to the child's side. The hatchling's silver eyes met the Empress's, a look of recognition flashing between them. The Empress had always known the hatchlings were intelligent, but this was beyond any intelligence she had witnessed. The creature was looking at her not as its ruler, but as if it was waiting for her to understand something profound. The child stirred again, but this time his eyes opened fully. For the first time, he met the Empress's gaze. His silver eyes, so pure, so bright, seemed to pierce through the veil of uncertainty she had been carrying. A silent connection passed between them, like an electric current, and the Empress felt an inexplicable sense of recognition. It was as if she had seen him before, in a dream, or in another life. The child's voice, soft and faint, finally broke the silence. "They are my family," he whispered, his words barely audible, but enough to freeze the room. The Empress's heart skipped a beat. The child's lips barely moved as he spoke, and yet his words hung in the air, filling the room with a heavy stillness. "They are my family." How could this child, a human and alien to her, speak such words with such certainty? The hatchlings, creatures of immense power, were drawn to him like no other. They were, in their own way, bound to him. The Empress felt a chill. The prophecy had spoken of a bond, a connection, but she hadn't fully understood its depth until now. The child wasn't just bonded to the hatchlings by fate or chance. There was something much deeper at work here, something that tied him to them in a way that made her blood run cold. Could this child be the key to unlocking their true power? Could he be the one meant to awaken the force buried within them? Family? The Empress's voice was barely a whisper as she repeated the word, unsure of its meaning. The child's eyes held hers for a long moment. "They are my kin," he said again, his voice growing slightly stronger. "I belong with them." The room fell into silence. The words hung heavily in the air, their meaning sinking in like stones dropping into a deep well. Belong with them? The Empress felt her heart race. The hatchlings were powerful, legendary creatures, bound by ancient forces she didn't fully understand. But what if this child, this human, had been born for this very purpose, to awaken that power? Darian stepped forward cautiously. "Your Majesty, I believe we must consider the possibility that the child is more than he seems. He's not merely a child abandoned by fate. He could be the one chosen to awaken the hatchling's latent abilities. The prophecy could be true. The child may be the key to unlocking powers we can't even begin to comprehend." The Empress clenched her fists, a mixture of fear and determination flooding her mind. She knew the hatchling's power was immense, too immense to be wielded by anyone without the proper understanding. They had always been a mystery to her, creatures of legend that no one truly understood. To hear Darian speak of unlocking their full potential sent a shiver down her spine. But she had to know. She had to understand what was at stake. "What do you suggest we do?" Solara asked, her voice steady, though her mind was racing with possibilities. Darian's gaze met hers, his eyes filled with a blend of awe and caution. "I suggest we try to understand the child's connection with the hatchlings. If we are to unlock their power, we must first see how deep the bond truly goes. We can't risk this child's safety, nor the safety of our empire, without fully understanding what we're dealing with." The Empress nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision before her. The child's presence had already altered the balance of power within her empire, and she couldn't ignore the strange feeling that something more was at play, something greater than any of them realized. As the hatchlings gathered closer to the child, their soft hums echoing through the room, the Empress's gaze softened. She didn't fully understand it, But she knew one thing for sure. Whatever the child was meant to become, the hatchlings were at the center of it. And she had to protect him, protect them all, if she was to ensure the survival of her empire. The answers, it seemed, were just beyond her reach. But the child was the key. And somehow, Solara knew that the future of her world, and perhaps the galaxy, rested in the hands of a small, unassuming human child. The journey to understanding had only just begun. The weeks that followed the child's arrival in the Empress's palace were filled with uncertainty and tension. Every day, the child grew more connected to the hatchlings, his bond with them deepening in ways no one could have predicted. Empress Solara, though still unsettled by the prophecy and the power that seemed to be awakening in the child, could no longer ignore the truth. Something far larger than she had imagined was unfolding, and the fate of her empire was inexorably tied to the tiny human child who had come from nowhere. It was a cold, moonless night when the breakthrough came. The Empress sat alone in her royal chamber, staring at the holographic star map that illuminated the stone walls of her private study. Her advisors had come and gone, each one offering their theories and concerns, but none of them had answers. Darian, the scholar who had first mentioned the ancient prophecy, was her last hope. She knew the records he had unearthed were crucial. They contained the key to understanding the child's purpose in her empire. Darian had spent sleepless nights going through ancient scrolls and texts, poring over forgotten knowledge. And now, finally, he had found something that would explain it all. The door to her chamber slid open, and Darian stepped inside, holding a thick, worn scroll in his hands. His face was pale, as if he had not rested in days, but his eyes shone with a light of urgency that Solara couldn't ignore. "Your Majesty," Darian said, his voice grave, "I believe we have found the truth." The Empress stood in motion for him to approach. Her heart began to race, a mixture of excitement and dread pooling in her chest. Could this be the moment when the child's connection to the hatchlings was finally revealed? Could this prophecy truly be the key to everything? Darian unrolled the scroll slowly, revealing intricate symbols and markings that made little sense to the untrained eye. The ancient text was written in a language lost to time, but Darian had deciphered it over the course of the past few days. As his finger traced the lines, he spoke in a quiet, almost reverent tone. "The scroll," he began, "was written by the first empress of our lineage, centuries before your time. It was hidden away in the deepest archives of the palace, meant to be forgotten, locked away for a reason. The prophecy it contains speaks of an event that will occur once the stars align, a time when a human child will come to the empire, carrying with him the power to awaken the hatchlings." The words sent a shiver down Solara's spine. She had heard of the ancient empress, a figure shrouded in mystery and legend, but she had never truly believed in the prophecies that were said to be buried with her. Now, with the child before her and the hatchlings acting as they were, Solara felt the weight of those old words pressing against her chest. Darian continued, his voice low and intense. "The prophecy does not just speak of a bond between the child and the hatchlings. It foretells of a rite of awakening, a ritual that must be performed when the child reaches a certain point in his connection with the hatchlings. If the ritual is successful, the hatchlings will unlock their full potential, becoming more powerful than ever before. They will become protectors, guardians not only of the empire, but of the very stars themselves." The Empress's breath caught in her throat. The hatchlings, the creatures she had always kept close to her heart, would become protectors of the entire galaxy? Could this child, this human child, truly be the key to that? Darian's voice grew more urgent as he explained, "But there is a danger, Your Majesty. The prophecy also warns that if the ritual fails, if the child and the hatchlings do not form the proper bond, the hatchlings will become uncontrollable, their power turning against the empire. It could lead to the destruction of everything." The Empress felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted. Her thoughts raced, each possibility more dangerous than the last. Could she really trust the prophecy? Could the child, this small, unassuming human, be the one to either save or doom everything she had worked for? But why would the hatchlings respond to him like this? Solara asked, her voice barely a whisper. They have never shown any attachment to anyone. Why him? Darian's gaze softened as he looked at the child, who lay still, his eyes closed, surrounded by the hatchlings as if he belonged to them. It is as though the child has awakened something within them. The connection they share is not one of force. It is instinctual, bound by the very essence of who they are. Perhaps they have waited for him, just as the prophecy foretold. And now they are trying to prepare him, to ensure that the ritual is ready. Solara stared down at the child, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision she had to make. She had always prided herself on being a ruler who commanded power and control. But now, faced with the ancient prophecy and the mysterious child, she found herself on the brink of something she didn't understand. If I allow this ritual, Solara said slowly, her voice trembling with uncertainty, and it fails, if the hatchlings turn against us, the empire could fall, Darian finished for her. But if it succeeds, the hatchlings will become protectors. The child, with the hatchlings at his side, could unite the galaxy in ways no one ever imagined. The Empress felt a cold sweat on her brow. The stakes were higher than anything she had ever faced. A single choice, one small decision, could either save the empire or destroy it entirely. She couldn't do this alone. She needed to understand more about the child, more about the nature of his connection with the hatchlings. I will not risk my empire on a chance, Solara said, her voice steely with resolve. We need to be certain that the child is ready. I must see what he can do. I will not allow this power to slip through our fingers. Darian nodded. I agree. We will begin preparations for the ritual. But we must move carefully. There is no room for error. Solara gazed at the child once more, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. The power of the hatchlings, the fate of her empire, the future of the galaxy, everything rested on the fragile shoulders of this child. But could she trust him? Could she trust the prophecy? Prepare the ceremony, Solara ordered, her voice firm. We will proceed with caution. But be ready. If the ritual fails, we will deal with the consequences. As the scholar departed, the Empress remained by the child's side, watching as the hatchlings softly hummed around him. Their glowing eyes locked on her in silent expectation. This was the moment she had feared and hoped for, all at once. The time had come to see if the prophecy would come true. The question was no longer whether the child could awaken the hatchlings, it was whether the galaxy would be ready for the power they would unlock. And more importantly, whether Solara was willing to stake her entire on that power. The answers were within reach, but they were not the ones she expected. The Empress stood on the balcony of her royal palace, the cool breeze of the night air brushing against her skin. Her eyes stared out at the sprawling city below, the glowing lights of her empire twinkling like distant stars. The world seemed so calm, so peaceful, yet Solara's mind was in turmoil. In the quiet stillness of the night, she felt the weight of the decision that loomed over her. The prophecy, the child, the hatchlings, all of it had been leading her to this moment. And she still didn't know if she was making the right choice. The child had been with her for weeks now. His bond with the hatchlings only growing stronger. They were inseparable, each day bringing new signs of their deep connection, an unspoken understanding between the child and the creatures, as if they were part of the same ancient force. Empress Solara had watched it all unfold with a mixture of awe and dread. The child's calm presence was powerful, and it was clear that he wasn't just some lost soul who had accidentally found his way into her empire. He was a key, a crucial piece of a puzzle that she didn't fully comprehend. Her advisors had been growing impatient, urging her to move forward with the ritual, to unlock the hatchling's full potential. But as each day passed, Solara became more and more uncertain. What if she was wrong? What if the prophecy was not a blessing, but a curse? The last thing she wanted was to risk everything on a chance, to gamble with the lives of her people, her empire, and the future of the galaxy itself. The stakes were higher than anything she had ever faced. "Your Majesty," came a voice from behind her. Solara didn't have to turn to know it was Darien. He had been her most trusted advisor for years, and she knew he could read her moods like no one else. "You're still troubled," he said gently, stepping closer. "The weight of this decision is heavy, I understand." Solara sighed, her eyes lingering on the horizon. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Darien. Every choice I make feels like it could shatter everything I've built. What if the prophecy is wrong? What if the child, despite everything, is not the one we've been waiting for? I can't afford to fail." Darien's expression softened. He had been by her side through countless battles, political intrigues, and moments of crisis. But this was different. He could see the inner conflict tearing at her, and he knew that the decision she faced now was more than just a political calculation. It was personal. The fate of the child and the future of the hatchlings were tied to something far deeper than power and politics. The prophecy speaks of two paths. "Your Majesty," Darien said, his voice steady. "One path leads to great power, the other to destruction. But the choice, in the end, is yours to make. You are not bound by fate, you can shape it. You've done so all your life. If you choose to move forward with the ritual, you do so with the knowledge that you are giving the child a chance to awaken the hatchling's true potential. But if you hesitate, if you pull away now, you risk losing everything. The hatchlings may never be the same, and the power they hold could turn against you." Solara closed her eyes, her thoughts swirling. Darien was right. She had always been a ruler who embraced power, who thrived in the face of challenges. But this felt different. The decision wasn't about controlling the empire. It was about trusting something far beyond her understanding. Trusting a child, a human, a being she barely knew. "I have always trusted my instincts," Solara murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "But this feels like something beyond me. I don't know if I can risk it. If I fail, I will lose everything, my people, my throne, my future, and the galaxy. It could all fall apart." Darien stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are the Empress, Solara. You are the one who decides. The child has shown us nothing but loyalty. The hatchlings have chosen him, and they have always been a reflection of the strength and will of your empire. Perhaps it's time to trust in what the universe has set in motion. Perhaps the time has come to embrace the unknown." The words struck Solara like a bolt of lightning. Embrace the unknown. She had spent so many years building her empire, carving out control over every piece of her domain. But had she ever truly embraced the unknown? Had she ever trusted in the natural forces beyond her control? She turned toward Darien, meeting his gaze with a mix of determination and uncertainty. "And what if I am wrong? What if this child, this human, cannot awaken the hatchlings? What if the prophecy was just a myth, a story passed down to keep us all in line?" Darien's eyes softened with understanding. "Then we will adapt, Your Majesty. The galaxy will still be here. The hatchlings will still be here. But this is not just a test of the child, it is a test of you too. Do you have the strength to move forward, even when the future is uncertain? Will you stand by your empire, by the prophecy, and by the bond that is growing before your eyes?" Solara took a deep breath. Her heart was heavy, but in that moment, she felt a shift within herself. Perhaps it was time to let go of the fear, to step into the unknown and face whatever the future held. She had always been a ruler who controlled her fate with an iron fist, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to trust in something larger than herself. She looked out over her empire again, her gaze sweeping over the shining city. the distant stars beyond, and the people who depended on her. She had built this empire with her own 2 hands, but now the future was not hers to control. The child, the hatchlings, they were the future. And it was time to accept that. "I will proceed with the ritual," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "But not because of the prophecy. Not because I trust fate. I will do it because I trust the bond between the child and the hatchlings. I will do it because I believe that we can shape our own destiny." Darian nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "A wise decision, Your Majesty. The child will need your strength, your guidance, as much as the hatchlings do." As Solara turned to leave the balcony, she felt a sense of clarity settle over her. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and possibility, but it was hers to walk. The child, the hatchlings, the empire, it was all part of the same story, a story that she would shape with her choices. And with that, she made her peace with the unknown. The time had come, the ritual would begin. The palace was abuzz with preparation. The grand hall, once a place of calm elegance, had been transformed into something far more sacred. Ancient symbols were etched into the stone floor, glowing faintly under the dim lights of the torches. The air was thick with the sense of anticipation, a strange mixture of hope and dread that hung in the atmosphere. Like a storm on the horizon, Empress Solara stood at the center of the hall, her eyes scanning the room filled with her most trusted officials and advisors. The child, the albino hatchlings, and the ritual, the moment had finally come. This was the culmination of everything she had feared and hoped for. The future of her empire, the fate of the hatchlings, and perhaps even the galaxy itself, rested on what would happen in the next few moments. The child, now standing with the hatchlings, looked every bit the quiet, mysterious figure he had been since his arrival. His silver eyes were wide, innocent yet knowing. The hatchlings flanked him on either side, their powerful forms towering over him, their glowing eyes fixed on the Empress with an intensity that felt almost protective. Despite their immense size and strength, they seemed to move with a sense of grace, as if they were more attuned to the child than to anything or anyone else. Solara's heart pounded in her chest. She had spent so many days wrestling with her fears and doubts, but now, standing at the threshold of the unknown, something in her shifted. This was no longer about her empire alone. It was about the future of all who depended on her and the legacy she would leave behind. The ritual was set to begin. Ancient texts had described every step of it, every gesture, every word, and yet there was still uncertainty in the air. There were no guarantees. The prophecy had said that the child would awaken the true power of the hatchlings, but what if it failed? What if the bond they shared couldn't be fully realized, and the power that stirred within the creatures turned against them all? Solara stepped forward, her commander's armor glinting in the low light as she approached the child and the hatchlings. The chamber fell silent, all eyes fixed on her. The weight of leadership pressed on her shoulders like a mountain. Rian, standing just behind her, gave a small nod, his expression solemn. He had been her guide, her confidant throughout this journey, and now he was as uncertain as she was. His eyes were filled with the same hope and fear that mirrored her own. It was time. There was no turning back now. "Are you ready?" Solara asked, her voice steady but filled with emotion. The question was meant for the child, though it felt like she was asking herself the same thing. The child didn't respond in words. Instead, his eyes met hers, and in that brief moment, something passed between them, a silent understanding. The hatchlings, sensing his readiness, moved closer, their enormous bodies surrounding him protectively. The room seemed to hum with a soft energy, a quiet power that began to rise from the depths of the floor, as if the very stones of the palace were alive. "Let the ritual begin," Solara commanded, her voice unwavering. With that simple declaration, the ceremony commenced. The high priests and priestesses who had gathered in the hall stepped forward, their movements deliberate and measured. They began to chant in a language that was older than the empire itself, their words filled with ancient power. The air seemed to vibrate with the sound, the very walls of the palace trembling with the force of the ritual. The child closed his eyes, his small hands rising slightly, palms facing the hatchlings. The hatchlings, in turn, lowered their heads, their glowing eyes locked onto his. It was as if they were waiting, their immense strength coiled within them, ready to be unleashed. The room fell into an eerie stillness, the only sound being the chanting of the priests and the soft hum of energy building between the child and the hatchlings. Solara could feel it now. Too, the energy pulsing in the air, thick and alive. It was not a feeling she had ever known before. The child, so fragile and small, seemed to hold the key to something far greater than she had ever imagined. The hatchlings, creatures of unimaginable power, were bound to him, their fates intertwined. If this ritual succeeded, it would unleash a force that could change the very fabric of the galaxy. And yet, the uncertainty remained. She could not deny the nagging fear that gripped her heart, the fear that this could all unravel in an instant. The bond that had formed between the child and the hatchlings was so new, so fragile. What if it wasn't enough? What if, in trying to unlock their full potential, they had awakened something they couldn't control? A sudden sharp crack echoed through the room, breaking the silence like thunder. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and for a moment, Solara thought the ritual had failed. Panic surged through her chest, but then she saw it, the hatchlings' eyes glowing brighter, their scales shimmering with an otherworldly light. The child's body seemed to radiate with energy, his silver eyes glowing in unison with the hatchlings. The moment had arrived. A deep, resonant hum filled the hall, vibrating through every stone and every soul present. The hatchlings began to move with a fluidity that had never been seen before, their wings unfurling slowly, their scales shimmering as if charged with immense power. The child stood at the center, his connection to them undeniable. The ritual had succeeded. The bond was complete. The Empress stood frozen, her heart beating loudly in her chest. This was it, the moment of truth. The hatchlings had reached their full potential, their power now fully awakened. And as their energy flowed outward, the palace, the city, and the very stars themselves seemed to respond. It was as though the universe itself had taken notice of this moment, of the bond that had been forged, the power that had been unlocked. But Solara knew that with this power came responsibility. She had seen firsthand the destructive potential of unchecked strength. The hatchlings were no longer just creatures in her care. They were a force that could either protect or destroy, depending on how they were wielded. And the child, the one who had awakened them, was now the keeper of that power. The Empress's thoughts were interrupted by a quiet, uncertain voice from beside her. It was Darian, speaking with a mixture of awe and fear. "Your Majesty, look," he said, pointing toward the child. Solara turned, her breath catching in her throat as she saw what had changed. The child, once so small and fragile, now stood with an air of quiet authority. The hatchlings, standing tall and strong beside him, no longer seemed like passive creatures. They seemed to be looking to him, waiting for his command. The child had become their leader. In that moment, Solara realized something profound. The prophecy had been true. The child was the key, not just to the hatchlings' power, but to the future of the empire. The ritual had not only awakened the hatchlings, it had awakened something inside the child. Something that made him a leader, a force capable of guiding these powerful creatures to protect the galaxy. Not destroy it. The Empress took a step back, watching as the child, surrounded by the hatchlings, seemed to take his first steps toward his new destiny. The future was no longer uncertain, it had been set in motion. And now, Solara understood that her role was not to control the future, but to guide it, to ensure that the child's path, And the path of the hatchlings led to a future of peace and balance. Her empire, her people, the galaxy, they were all connected now. The time of uncertainty was over. The child had awakened the hatchlings, and with their power at his side, they would protect the universe. As had been foretold, the Empress watched as the child and the hatchlings stood united, their future just beginning, and for the first time, Solara felt a deep peace wash over her.